Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Youth Ignited. Now, before the break, we were speaking to Tanya Khalid about mental health issues. Now, Tanya, one of the things that I've been thinking about as well, you identified at the early age, at the age of 12, but many a times people don't realize that they have anxiety issues or mental health illnesses, if you can call it that, until the late 30s or even 40s or in 50s. Being 10 years down the line, being 12 years down the line, since that understanding that you have these issues, how are you coping with it now?
Well, my way of coping with things is learning about them. I remember back in high school, my 10th grade biology teacher, his mother was going through some sort of illness, and he did a whole PowerPoint presentation that day about the illness, and he told us that his best coping mechanism was learning the most about the illness so that he can combat it. Knowledge is power. So for me, it was something I was interested in, not just because I was going through it, but because the human mind to me is very interesting. So I went to school for psychology, and right now I'm studying my bachelor's in psychology and human development and family studies.
That's really interesting. So with regards to an understanding and an education about these mental health issues, I found that amongst the religious fraternity, there have also been ignorance about that these are actually real issues and people are facing real challenges. And many times when we think it's it's a lack of spirituality, it's just a neurochemical imbalance. And in order to restore that, we should actually be there for people. How has your experience been with regards to Islam, and as well as the community, the Muslim community, and the leadership?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people, you're right, don't know that it's a neurological imbalance, which it can be. A lot of it is just necessarily how your genes and your DNA, makeup is, and a lot of people don't give that credit. So, especially in the Muslim community, mental health and illnesses have been such a stigma. There's been such a stigma with them about that, it's just a jinn or whatever, like we talked about earlier. And unfortunately, that's just how it is, and I feel like there's just not much exposure in the Muslim community, but it is growing, and I've seen a lot of Shifa clinics and this, that at the masjids growing, and they have therapists sitting there and stuff. So I see that it is growing. However, with my experience, whenever I was back in 2011, I went to a therapist. That was my first time that I started going and seeing a therapist. And then whenever I moved back to Houston, in 2016 or 2015, I went to a Muslim therapist for the first time, and that was my first experience dealing with mental health and Islam together. And that was my goal, because at first I was just dealing with my illness as an illness, and I wasn't taking spirituality into account. And yeah, a lot of people do put too much emphasis on spirituality when it comes to those things, but I was trying to find that balance. Unfortunately, my experience with a Muslim therapist went horribly. I feel like right now, even though it's growing, and the awareness is growing in the Muslim community, and there are qualified therapists who are Muslim, they don't necessarily know how to handle things professionally.
Okay.
So my experience with the Muslim therapist went wrong just because I feel like the cultural stigma with it is still there. Despite being a therapist, despite going to school for it and learning about it and doing it as your profession, you're still treated, or I was still treated with the same, you don't have faith, or you don't have taqwa, or you don't have this, or you don't have that. And I didn't appreciate that at all. And so for me, therapy or psychology and Islam really need to come together in a way where there's no judgment. And there's not a lot of places for that. People say only God can judge me, but that everyone can judge you. Everyone can judge you, and they do.
And they do,
Yeah, but the only person who has the right, or the only being that has the right, is your Creator. And for me, the only thing that got me through my anxiety or through whatever I was doing to deal with it was, I know my God, and my God is what I think of Him.
Absolutely.
And so if I think of Him as understanding and caring and this, that, whatever, and I'm struggling with school or relationships or with my family through my anxiety, then no one knows that better than my God. And that's what got me through a lot of it.
Yeah, that's a very famous hadith of "Ana 'inda dhanni abdi bi," that I am as my servant thinks of me, and the mercy of God is far outstretches the mercy of any therapist and these things.
Right.
One of the things that you were saying earlier is that when we think about autism, for example, you don't get an autistic child, but a child with autism.
Right.
Right. And so I think there's a perception that needs to be transformed and perspective transformation in the community, that people that have these mental health issues and illnesses, they aren't stuck with that for the rest of their life. That's a part of them, like Sidi Abbas was saying earlier, that it's the small hole amongst the bigger vision of your life.
Right.
And so how do you view yourself as that, and what examples can you give with regard to your interaction with people in transforming their perspectives?
Right. So for example, back in 2011, I was working at Starbucks, and I still am, but while working for them and while being at work, I had an anxiety attack, and I honestly don't even remember what for, but I remember I just had to step away, go in the back, sit down, and people were asking me, like, what can I do? Is there something that I can do for you? Can I get you water? Can I do this? Can I do that? And one of the biggest things that helped me was I learned very early on that the average anxiety attack lasts 7 minutes. So what I started doing with myself is playing a trick on myself, and I would just, anytime I had an anxiety attack, I would look at my clock, count for 7 minutes, and give myself those 7 minutes, and then after that I knew it would be over.
Yeah.
So that's how I handled it in the workplace, and yeah, like, it was really overwhelming and kind of embarrassing having an anxiety attack at work, because I wasn't necessarily like so open about it where everyone knew, because it's not necessarily that something that shows. It's not a physical ailment, so nobody sees it unless you show it.
Yeah.
But after that incident and after that moment, 7 minutes were gone. Everyone around me knew what to do. I didn't need anything. I just needed my 7 minutes.
Yeah.
And after that, my coworkers didn't see me as someone who was an anxious person all the time, and a lot of people were surprised, because they were like, you're not necessarily anxious, or if there's a time constraint or time pressure, then I handle it pretty well. So it's not necessarily like, oh, you have to take an exam, you're anxious about it, or this or that.
Yeah.
For me, it was seeing a commercial on TV about a mother and a son, and the mom dying, and me thinking like, oh, I've always had a fear that my mom was going to die early on.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, I always had that thought, so that was something that always triggered my anxiety.
Okay.
And so for me, you're right, anxiety isn't who you are, and it's not necessarily your personality, and just because you're not an anxious person, or you're okay with time constraints, or you're good under pressure, doesn't mean you don't have anxiety.
Yeah. That's amazing. Just coming back to your studying of psychology, one of the things that we learn in Tasawwuf, the spiritual aspect of Islam, is to know where your thoughts come from, and to know what triggers that anxiety. You get angelic thoughts, and you also get thoughts that try to waver you off the path. With regards to psychology and understanding of now studying this, how do people actually deal with those triggers? They're all over the place. How do you just shut them out of or do you?
I think that has a lot to do with like understanding yourself and being self-aware. For me, it was knowing where it's coming from, and so before I could even start thinking about where my thoughts are going, I would notice my fast heart rate or physical symptoms.
Yeah.
And so I would notice those things and be like, okay, my heart rate's fast. Why is it fast right now? Okay, Tanya, what are you thinking about? And where did it come from? What made you think about it? So it's a lot about self-reflection, and that's really what's helped me all these years, is being able to be self-aware and reflecting on my own thoughts or my physical symptoms.
Yeah, so just in conclusion, I'd like to get your advice for people who don't know that they have mental health issues, or they do have anxiety, or even those who are 5 years or 7 years down the line. What is your advice for those who are struggling to cope, with regards to these issues?
First, I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, figure out where you are in life, on how it's affecting your daily life. To what extent is it inhibiting you from being successful in relationships or your daily life or going to work or school or whatever it is. And then from there, I would say that the thing that's helped me the most is to be self-aware and to notice my physical symptoms, if not my mental and really reflect on what I'm thinking about and where it's coming from and the root of everything.
That's really amazing, and thank you for joining us today. It's been a really interesting discussion, and hopefully we can open the airlines and the avenues to actually dealing with this, not only from the perspective of the youth, but also the religious leadership, etc. We've been speaking to Tanya Khalid about this very important issue about mental health. This is an issue that we always come back to. How do we identify as a Muslim? Do I identify as a Muslim, or do I identify as a soul being affected by various challenges throughout life? That this is a test from Allah, and doesn't mean that you have an imbalance with regards to your faith, but it's usually a neurochemical imbalance that we need to actually deal with from a medical perspective as well as from a spiritual perspective, in not only as an individual but as a community. And this is why the Prophet ﷺ said al-hikmah dalatul mu'min, so that we can endeavor throughout, not only from an Islamic perspective but from a tradition that encompasses a canonical understanding of knowledge from Al-Alim, the All-Wise, and Al-Hakim, that knowledge and wisdom is the lost riding beast of the believer. And wherever we find that, whether it's in psychology, philosophy, and all of these scientific sciences, we are ought to cling onto that in order to understand and uplift our community from the perspective of the personal, the societal, the family, societal, and the globalized world that we live in. Thank you very much for joining us on this episode of Youth Ignited. We look forward to seeing you again.